Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Before You Take the LSAT. I'm Shannon Benyamin, and we have a very special guest today. We have the founder and creator of Before You Take the LSAT and my sister, Doreen Benyamin. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about, or Doreen's going to be talking about her path from community college to Columbia Law School. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that we both actually started out in this studio as high school students. So big shout out to KBEV 6 Studios for allowing us to film here today. So let's get started, Doreen.
Hey, Shannon.
Hey, how are you? So let's start with, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I do want to just first say that I'm so grateful for you for doing this. You've been there since the very beginning, and I'm really excited that we get to do this interview together.
Me too.
Okay, so just to get started, a little bit about my background. So I was actually born and raised in Los Angeles. My parents, or our parents, are from Iran. They immigrated here in the 70s, and I think one of the interesting things is I grew up only speaking Farsi at home, and it wasn't until I went to school that I actually started learning English. But I think...
So how are you able to, how are you able to navigate through school with, English being your second language and your parents not really being able to teach you?
Well, just to clarify, they did speak, just for people watching, they did speak English, but they just didn't feel very comfortable with it. So what happened was my mom instilled a love for books. So we ended up, one of my favorite things growing up was going to the library. And I think because of that, and because I loved reading so much, I never felt behind.
Yeah.
So I think that's what helped me.
Is there anything else you want to add, or should we move on to your experience at Santa Monica College?
We can jump right into it.
All right, sounds good. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience at community college at Santa Monica?
Yeah, so during high school, I took my first community college class, and it was a class on psychology. And I had always had an interest in psychology, but I had never taken a course or anything to see if, there was any reason why I should be, if there was any concrete reason.
Yeah.
And so taking that first class really made me realize that it was something I wanted to do. So once I started at SMC, at Santa Monica College, I decided to go full force. Since I had taken a few college classes, I took as many credits as I could each semester, and I applied and I transferred to UCLA.
Right.
After 1 year.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to complete UCLA in 3 years?
Yeah, so I think part of it was just being able to transfer out of SMC in 1 year, and then
And did you plan on doing that?
Not while I was in high school, but once I got to SMC, I realized it made sense. It didn't make sense to be there for 2 years,
Right.
which is what most people do, but it just, was easier to finish it in 1 year and move on.
Right. So when you're majoring in psychology, did you know that you maybe wanted to go after higher education, or did you think you were actually going to practice psychology, or what was the game plan?
So while I was at UCLA, I was thinking about, I always was a planner. I always knew 1 year, 2 years in advance what I wanted to do. But once I was at UCLA, and I thought I knew what I wanted to do while I was at UCLA too. I thought I wanted to pursue a master's program in psychology and applied psychology.
Yeah.
I knew that I didn't want to practice as a psychologist.
Right.
And so that had originally been my plan. But did I know I wanted to go to law school at that point? No. That was something I figured out a little bit later down the line.
Right. So do you want to tell us maybe a bit how you began to realize that maybe law was something you wanted to do, or how did you figure out what you wanted to do after graduating?
Yeah, so once I realized that I didn't want to do psychology, I had already graduated, and so it was actually a very difficult process of there's so many options. Every year it feels like there are more than there were the previous year, and so I feel like that makes it difficult to choose. But I spoke to my friends, and they kind of told me what they saw as my strengths and weaknesses, and I spoke to family, And I kind of just realized, like, watching our parents and our brother, all of them started their own business, and there are so many legal issues that come up when you're running a business, and
Yeah.
also there are so many ups and downs. Like, it's inevitable. If you run a business, you're gonna have ups and downs.
Right.
And I think just watching that, I realized, like, I want to have the economic security of a professional degree.
Yeah.
That's how I made that decision. And there's the flexibility of the JD degree it goes so far, and I really appreciated that, and the intersection of law and business was really interesting to me. So that's how I decided.
Nice. So that's what inspired you to maybe go after a law degree, but let's backtrack a little. While you were in UCLA, do you want to talk about maybe some of the extracurriculars you did? Or I also know you minored in Spanish. How did you decide to minor in Spanish?
So I think a lot of people study Spanish, or like they study another language in school, and a lot of times they feel like they still can't use it.
In high school, right?
Yeah. And so I had started learning Spanish since middle school. It was one of the courses that were offered, and I took it. But after I graduated, and I took it all throughout until the end of high school, and I still felt like I couldn't speak the language.
Yeah.
And I was frustrated. So once I went to Santa Monica College, I just started all over from the very first course. And when I transferred, I just realized that I had taken so many credits already that it kind of made sense to do a minor in Spanish instead of just doing like random elective courses.
Nice.
And so, yeah, that's how I decided to do a minor. And I'm really happy because I feel like it has been a great background for a lot of, like, it's useful in law, it's useful in business. No matter what you want to do, it's always helpful to know another language and understand a different culture.
Yeah. So is there anything else you want to talk about while anything regarding your time at UCLA, or do you want to move on? Move on?
Yeah.
All right. So so you decide you want to go after a law degree, and how do you go about that process?
So I think one of the...
Because it's a lot. It's not only just, okay, let's just apply. No, there's that test, the LSAT is
Yes.
a big part of it, right?
Right.
So, yeah, tell us
And
about...
here at Before You Take the LSAT, we talk about that quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's like... So one of the earliest things I can remember is that we had a family friend who was going to UCLA, and she had done really well on the LSAT. And I think that just, like, that score was anchored in me, and I was like, I think if she can do it, I can do it. Like, why not?
Yeah.
Why not dream big? And I also, there was just a lot of motivation. There's so much that you can gain from doing well on the LSAT, and I recognize that, and I just wanted to do my best and, like, devote my time and energy to it.
Yeah.
And so I first started out by trying to take a prep course. Like, most people do that, and it feels like the comfortable route. I hated it.
Yeah.
I felt like it wasn't helpful at all. And so, like, I just started self-studying, and I would still go to the location where they had the class, but sometimes, like, the advice they gave was so bad that I felt like it was better if I didn't
Yeah.
follow it. And so I would talk to the professor sometimes about certain things that I felt comfortable talking to him about, but I would just spend most of my time just studying on my own and, like, learning from books.
And during this time, what else were you doing? Were you just focused on studying for the LSAT, or what was going on?
So the first time I took the LSAT, I took it more than once. And the first time I took it, I was just studying. I think it was about a month and a half. Like, I decided in September that I wanted to go in law school, and I, like, studied from September to, like, mid-October. I think the test was in mid-October. And so that month and a half, I was only studying.
And I'm just curious, what advice do you have for other people who are looking to take the LSAT? Do you recommend that they also work while studying, or how do you think is the best time to manage that time, or what's the best way to approach that?
I think not everybody has the opportunity to not work and just study full time. If you have that opportunity, obviously it makes it a lot easier. You could just dedicate yourself completely. But a lot of people also study while working. I think when you have, like, an extended time frame, it's a lot easier because you could say, like, I'll study for 3 hours after work, or, but, no matter what your situation is, like, you just have to study as much as you possibly can, I think, to get the best score you can.
Right. So that first time you spend a month of just studying, right? And you don't really get a score that you wanted. So tell me about how it looked like after that.
So, so just to back up for 1 second, I started at a 148. That was my diagnostic score. And the first score that I ever got was a 161. And so it took me about a month and a half to go from the 148 to the 161. And then, so you're asking me like how I decided to take the test again?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
So,
And also the process of were you now working again too,
Yeah.
or was this also just only studying?
so at that point, I started working at a law firm, and I would study like after work and on the weekends. But that time, I also wasn't so happy. I ended up getting a 164. It wasn't until the final time that I took the LSAT that I really felt like I had the opportunity to study as much as I possibly could and get the score that I wanted.
Right. So should we talk a little bit about that final time, or is there anything else you want to add before we go into that final time before you take the LSAT? Because I know that's a very unique story, or I think it's pretty inspirational.
No, that's fine. We can, yeah.
Okay, so now tell us about that last time where you get your final score, which was a 174.
So this was like, you know, I was working at that time, but I decided like it was so hard to balance those two things that I decided that I needed just 1 month to study as much as I can and do the best I can on this test. And it was like that was my like final chance. And after that, I would be done.
Yeah.
Like I knew that. So I actually had a friend who was going to UCSD to San Diego. She was living in San Diego, and she offered for me to stay with her. So I moved out to San Diego,
Wow.
stayed with her. The only like thing I had to do was study, and I would like work out, and like the place included room and board, so I didn't even have to
That's
cook.
amazing. Yeah. So you had
Yeah.
nothing else to worry about except for studying.
Yeah, and so I would literally study all day long, like from the morning until like late at night. And at that point, I focused on like especially the game section. In the past, I'd focused on other sections, and so I really wanted to hone in on that one section especially. But like I studied the whole exam, and yeah, I was able to increase my score in that time period.
Now, I know you were almost about to not even register for that final LSAT. So can you tell us that story?
Yeah, so what happened was I went to SD, and then I got like cold feet. I was like, what am I doing? This is so dumb. Like I should have just like, you know, it wasn't that I wasn't going to apply, but I was like, what is this going to do? I wasn't
That
even
one
sure.
month, right? Yeah.
I wasn't sure if my score would like, yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's hard to get a big increase in your score in 1 month.
also like it was a new place, and I didn't necessarily feel as comfortable. Like my friend was there, but it just, it was, not home.
Yeah.
So I called my mom, our mom, and I told her, I was like, I don't even know. Like, it's like, I shouldn't have even thought about this. This wasn't a good idea. And she's like, look, you took your month off. You're here. You're like there in SD. Your friend's there. She's going to support you. Just do it. Like, you have nothing to lose. It's 1 month. Do it, and you're done. I was like, okay, fine.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's a good mindset.
So I just signed up for the test. And like after, like once I signed up, I was like fully committed. And I, like I had been before too. I think there was just like so much about like moving, being away, feeling, like doubting myself for a moment.
And also now you're getting closer to the score you ultimately wanted or were aiming for.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I think there was an interesting part when I found out my score.
Should we talk about that
Yeah,
story?
we can talk about that story.
Okay, so I remember that day very vividly. I remember you getting your results, and you sent me an email or you called me during a lunch break, and you're like, you were too scared to look at the email containing your results, so you sent me an email with clear instructions of what to send back to you. It said, if it was this score or lower, send me a text or an email saying bad. And if it was between this number and this number, tell me good. And if it's higher than, I think it was a 170, you said to send you back great. So I remember seeing the 174. I did not know what that meant for her. I didn't know what the highest score was, but I followed the instructions and sent you back an email just saying great, and then I don't remember what happens after that.
I mean, I still didn't know my score, so I went and looked at it at that point because I was like, thank God. Because my concern was, I tell people when you study for the LSAT, like, you should have a good idea of what your score is going to be because you've been taking practice tests, and your LSAT is basically just another practice test, so why would it be any different?
Yeah.
But, you have nerves, like, there's so many things that go into it. So those scores that I told you, they were based on my previous score. So I was like, if it's lower than my previous score, that's really bad. If it's above my previous score and like up to like the high 160s, I was like, that's good. But if it's above the 160s, like that's insane. Like that's so cool, and like that's,
Yeah.
that was where my goal was, but I didn't know if I would hit it.
Yeah.
And so once I finally checked it, I was like, wow. It was a lot.
Another thing I want to mention is one of the strategies that you use to study, which I think is pretty smart. Instead of always staying somewhere that's quiet, you made sure to also, go to coffee shops or places that weren't going to be so quiet to better prepare yourself for the test, right?
Yeah, so like I have a webinar on the LSAT. That was like the first thing we ever did on this channel, and a lot of people ask for advice. Like ever since I posted that, I've been getting emails every single day. And one of the things I like to tell people is to make your testing conditions more difficult than what it looks like on the day of the LSAT. So like we have like a experimental section on the LSAT, and most people when they take a practice test, they don't include that. And so maybe you'll get tired or you can't handle it's harder to do that many sections in a row or whatever it is. And so that's one thing I tell people is take as many sections, if not add an extra one. Take it in a coffee shop. Like, don't always do it at home with noise canceling headphones so that, like you get used to it, and you don't know what the day of your test, like someone's sitting there like
sneezing or
sneezing or like looking around or, being distracting. I've heard of like, I don't know, there are like stories where proctors are like eating and like they're chewing chips.
Wow.
Like, so there are all these things that come up, and like for me, I have studied in so many different places that it just was like, did not faze me.
Yeah. So now let's talk about now you getting that score, knowing that I didn't know it was a good score, but so when you see that score, what does that mean for you? Because I know before when you were applying to schools from community college, you mainly wanted to stay in the area.
Yeah.
In LA. So now this time around, how, like, looking at that number, what did that mean for you?
So I had thought that I wanted to stay in LA, even when I applied. I thought, like, there's no reason why I want to move. And I hadn't applied until after I took the LSAT. So I thought that I knew that I wanted to stay in LA, so I applied mainly to schools in LA. And I decided to apply to, like, a few schools. Just one of them, which was Columbia, was based off a comment someone told me. They're like, they knew me well. They're like, you did well on the LSAT, like, just apply to Columbia, why not?
Yeah.
I was like, okay. And I had visited like Harvard because one of my friends lived in Boston, and actually that was the first time that I ever even thought about like going to an Ivy League school. Or
going to another school outside of LA, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that point I was like, if I'm gonna move out of LA, it's only if it's like a really good school.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like my family's there, I didn't know if I would have moved otherwise, but yeah. So I knew that a 174 was at the 75th percentile for Harvard, and that was kind of how I had chosen it as like a target score. So I actually ended up hitting my target score. Like that's what I would have been
That's amazing.
Like yeah. And so yeah, what was your question?
Just seeing the 174
what it meant to me.
Yeah. And
well, I knew that it changed the options, but I honestly didn't realize that what it actually would mean for me.
So now, do you want to talk about your time at Columbia, maybe? Or is there anything else you want to add before that?
We can talk about, like, hearing back as well.
Okay.
Because I think that was really interesting because when I told our parents, I told I told Dad, and he's like, oh, that's so cool. Like, a lot of politicians go there, like, And I tell my mom, and she's like, oh, nice, congrats. And, like, she wasn't as excited, and I realized like my mom had never heard about Colombia before. But you know, now she's like so excited and she tells everyone, "Oh my God, I goes to Colombia." But it's just interesting.
Yeah,
You know?
I think that happens with a lot of students who their parents are immigrants.
Yeah.
It's they might know of like a couple Ivy Leagues, but they don't really know all the Ivy Leagues. So
I think also like being on the West Coast, it's less likely that you would know about it.
yeah,
But you know.
yeah. So now, do you want to talk about your time at Columbia? Why Columbia?
Yeah. So I chose Columbia. There are a lot of things. It was like, it's a great school. It's in New York City. Like, I felt like I would be comfortable, you know. New York has all types of people and like so many opportunities. And also it's actually like the legal center of America. And so having all of those things those were all really important factors. And I knew it would be a life-changing opportunity. It has been, and I knew before I started there that it would be. And so
it's lived up to your expectations.
yeah, it might have exceeded them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you tell me maybe your favorite part about going to school at Columbia?
Yeah, I don't think this answer will ever change. I think my favorite part of Columbia is the people I'm surrounded by. The answer used to be it's like my peers, and that's still true. I think my peers are like, everyone just has such interesting stories, partially because, or a lot of it I think is because Columbia doesn't only look for people who have background working at law firms and things like that as paralegals.
There's a lot of diversity for the most part, right?
Like I remember like someone had been like a monk previously, like
Wow.
someone had like helped with issues in human trafficking. Like it was just like people had been in the military. It was just like everybody had such diverse backgrounds, and that's what makes classes and like school so interesting, is just hearing everyone's diverse viewpoints.
Yeah. So now I want to talk about, since it's your third year at Columbia,
Yeah.
I want to maybe ask you what advice would you have, or what do you wish you would have known before you had started at Columbia, or before you started?
I think one of the most helpful things is recognizing, I feel like being a 1L and being a 2L and 3L, so first year versus being a second or third year student, it's like different worlds. And I didn't realize that enough as a first year student. If I realized that, I think I would have taken advantage of opportunities to talk to second year and third year students. I felt like myself and maybe other people, it's like being a 1L is like being like a headless chicken. Like you have no idea what you're doing and you're just like walking around, and it's like nobody, you know, everybody's just figuring it out. It's so different than what you do in undergrad. And talking to 2Ls and 3Ls, they're just like, they've been there, they've done it. There's so much you could learn from them. So that's one thing that I wish I knew, for sure.
And also, can you tell us about what advice would you give? How can someone better prepare themselves before going into law school?
I think one of the most important things is like the way that you're tested in law school is so different, and your grades are so important in law school, that I think that it makes sense to invest some time into like reading a book on how to take a law school exam. There's like a book called Open Book by an NYU professor. I believe his name's like Barry Friedman. And reading things like that, I think, is really helpful in preparing to do your best.
Yeah. And I also know, and if you want to move on to your extracurriculars,
Sure.
do you want to do that?
Yeah.
So I know you have taken advantage of the extracurriculars at Columbia.
Yeah.
So can you maybe tell us about some of the things that you're a part of?
Sure. So this year I'm part of the Senate.
And maybe also can you include what you think is important, or what opportunities do you think that most law schools have, but maybe not enough people are taking advantage of them?
Okay.
Or what advice would you give in general for getting involved?
I'll start with that. The advice I'd give for getting involved is recognizing that when you're a law student, so many people are so much more receptive to speaking to you, and it's people like all different levels. Especially if you're able to go to like a top law school, a lot of times if you reach out to people who are much further along in their careers, yeah, there's a sound coming, but it's okay. Especially people who are like a lot further in their careers, you can reach out, and a lot of times they'll come speak at the school.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
yeah, so I think what I would recommend is just taking Shannon.
Yeah. Wait, the camera's gonna be on you.
But one of the things I'd recommend is for students to take advantage of opportunities of talking to different people. So like hosting a lunch event and inviting someone you look up to whose career you want to emulate, like reaching out to them and just giving it a shot. A lot of times they'll say yes and you'll be surprised. And like I know a lot of times students will have the speaker for a lunch talk and then after ask like, hey, are you, if you're free, like are you open to like going to lunch with a few students, and then you get to know them even better. And those aren't really opportunities that you have like in the same way coming out of law school, even if you go to a great school.
Yeah.
Because as a student, other people are like, oh, I know, I remember what it feels like to be a student, I want to help them. Once you graduate, it's like, oh, they probably just want a job.
Yeah.
A lot of times. I mean, I don't think that's always true, but there's a lot of that. And so I think I would take advantage of that.
And then do you want to talk about your extracurriculars right now?
Yeah. So I've been pretty involved. I think like knowing that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity and like there's all these opportunities while you're in school, I've tried to take advantage of as much as I can. So I've done like student senate, I've TA'd for a negotiations course, I've externed at the MasterCard headquarters, and I'll talk about that a little bit more because I think that one's especially interesting. What else? I've led an international trip with like over 50 Columbia Law School students.
Wow.
I've co-chaired Columbia Law School's first legal tech fair. And I've been like president of multiple clubs, and I took my own advice and have hosted a lot of lunch events at Columbia with people that I look up to and would love to have like a career similar to them.
That's really cool. So
Yeah.
what are you most looking forward to?
Just generally, like in the future,
Yeah, sure.
I guess one of the things that I really enjoyed is growing this channel because I feel like despite the fact that there are so many opportunities within law, beyond law, like once you have a legal education, especially at a top school, there's there's so many things that you could do with what you've learned, like the analytical skills, the knowledge, but I feel like there's not a lot of clarity on what those different paths look like, and a lot of times the focus is like the quantitative, like how much money do you make, what is, like those types of things, but it's also important to know like what qualities are important. What's your,
Yeah.
what would match your personality? Is this something you would enjoy doing? And I feel like it's a lot harder to figure that out and to know what the job looks like day to day. And so one of the things I'm looking forward to is doing more interviews with people and maybe having something that I wish existed, like creating what I wish existed, which is a resource where people can have better insights into what the different career paths look like.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think most students would want to be able to have that as a resource.
Thank you.
Can you also, do you want to talk about your time at MasterCard?
So what I was going to mention about that is I think Columbia is one of the first schools to have a program on in-house counsel, like an externship program with in-house counsel. And I just really, like I mentioned about like the intersection of law and business, it's always been something that's been of interest to me. And in-house counsel is like the perfect intersection because you deal with complex business issues that also involve legal issues. A lot of times like they're intertwined. And so I think like a lot of schools have different specialties. So when people are applying, one thing is to recognize that law schools aren't only different in their rankings just generally, but they differ in what, like, if you're interested in a specific subspecialty and if you want to go into a certain field, look into that. Like, Columbia is great for people who have any interest in entrepreneurship because of the coursework that they have. And so I would just say, like, that's one thing that I've learned during my process is how much schools vary on things like that. Even if you go to, like, let's say like Harvard or Yale or Columbia, they all have different things, or any school that you go to.
Yeah.
It's important to recognize those things.
So do your research before.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you think is important during your time at Columbia so far that you want to mention? Or what are you most proud of so far?
I don't know if there's anything in particular that I'm like necessarily proud of. I'm just happy that I've been able to take advantage of all these opportunities, but it's obviously made it more difficult. Like a lot of people say like law school is so hard.
Yeah.
And it really is. It really is. But I'm happy that I did it, and I feel like I've grown so much, both personally and professionally. And I really think it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. So I wouldn't change it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe start talking about before you take the LSAT?
Sure. So I mean,
Do you want to start with why you created this channel?
Sure. So I mean, part of it was just like realizing that there are all these opportunities, but I was like, it wasn't very clear what each one looked like. So that was a big part of like deciding to start it.
Yeah, and also I just want to add, I remember even when you were like majoring in psychology, you were always a resource for other people. I remember like being in the car with you and someone would just call you up and ask you for advice on anything really. So I think you've always had that to like help other people, and you also recognize that it would have been helpful if you had a resource like this. So that's
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm drawn to it. It's like, on the one hand, I think I would find it helpful, but I'm also drawn to it because the goal is to help other people as well. So I just like, it's like a win-win.
yeah.
So I like to approach things with that mentality of like, how can it be meaningful in multiple ways? So
Do you want to talk about what has been your experience since you've started before you take the LSAT?
So that first webinar, it's by the time we post this, I think it'll be maybe exactly 2 years since I posted that first webinar. And ever since, and the first webinar that I'm talking about, it was
That was also your first video posted on this channel.
Exactly. So that was when this all started.
Yeah.
Before You Take the LSAT started. And it's, there's so much that goes into that. But it's been interesting because, so just to mention, so that webinar was live webinar just about the LSAT. And ever since I posted that webinar, almost every single day somebody's reached out to me. Like people have reached out to do collaborations. Like it gave me the opportunity to speak to a lot of people and get to meet people that I wouldn't have otherwise met.
Yeah.
So it's been a really cool opportunity, and I've been enjoying it. So I guess when you ask me what I'm most excited about, that's one of the things I'm most excited about, is to see like where that goes.
Yeah, so that kind of gave you a platform and also an excuse to meet really cool people. I know you've been able to interview really cool people. Do you want to talk about any of those interviews?
Yeah, so one of them was with the former general counsel of Apple. That was a really cool opportunity. He was actually teaching at CLS, so I took his class, and I just asked him if he would be willing to do an interview. And
so I know a lot of people ask you how you're able to get these interviews. The key is to just ask, right?
That's true. It's always good to just put yourself out there, and just, the worst thing that happens is they say no.
Yeah.
I actually asked him on the very first day of class.
Wow.
And he wasn't able to schedule me until the very last day. Like, he wasn't able to schedule me for a date except for the very last day that he was at CLS.
Wow.
So if I hadn't asked on that first day, he probably couldn't have done it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you got to interview him. Do you want to talk about that experience or other people you've been able to interview since then?
Yeah, so we've also had the GC of Nike. We've had somebody who founded his own. He went from working at a law firm to like founding his own tech startup, actually, that he sold to Amazon for like $80 million. It's insane, like the people, and he was actually a professor at the business school. That's how I originally met him, by taking his class. But it's just like, everybody has such interesting stories, and they've done so much. Like, even the former GC of Apple, his plan was never even to be a lawyer. He just did it based off like a scholarship option that he had that didn't allow him to go to med school. So it's just like, all of these things, you listen to people's stories and you're like, wow, this person got to the top of his field and he wasn't even planning to be in this field.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, no, not really.
No? All right.
You mean just generally?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm thinking about what I wish I would have known if I was in someone's position who's watching this video.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've tried to like give a lot of that advice throughout this.
And also on your Instagram,
And
right?
on my Instagram. So I follow Instagram, YouTube. I have a podcast. You might be listening to this on podcast.
Right.
I guess like one thing that I've heard over and over again from my peers and like different people is just to put yourself, like, give yourself a chance for someone to say yes. Like, you don't think you're gonna get into Columbia Law School? Apply. It doesn't matter.
I mean, you were also.
I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
I really wouldn't have applied if someone didn't tell me. Like, I had no plans. I didn't, because part of it was that I didn't even think I would go there.
Yeah.
You know, so like, keep an open mind. Just give it a shot. You never know. And like, for example, if you're studying for the LSAT, that's a learnable test. It's your score can change your life, and my life is an example of that. Like, I really think it's so different from what it would have been.
Yeah, I think most people tend to think that, you know, like after their diagnostic score, that, you know, maybe they can improve it by
A little.
Yeah, a little, but not a big jump. But I mean, you're an example of someone where if you're willing to like put in the work and keep trying, you can eventually like really improve, like get a big jump in your score.
Yeah.
I mean, even that last time you took the LSAT.
Yeah. But I guess, yeah, part of it is don't get anchored to that first score, you know?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything. You just kind of like took it without knowing anything. That doesn't mean anything. But one other thing I would like to talk about is, before we did this interview, like I talked to a few different people who have reached out from Before You Take the LSAT, my close friends, to kind of see like maybe there are certain things that might be interesting for people for me to talk about. And one thing that I realized a lot of people were curious about was the mindset. Like, how do you keep going even when you feel, and like we've addressed it a little, like there were times where it was my mom. There were times actually like you helped me, like just general moments of doubt. But I think the most is like, if you can get yourself to believe in yourself that you can do it, like just give it a shot. I think that will take you the furthest. But yeah, I think I think in terms of motivation, just keeping the mindset of like growth. Just because you got this score, just because this happened, just because in the past you were like this, doesn't mean that's who you are. And I think like there were even times when I was taking the LSAT in that last month.
Wow.
Where I got scores that were like much lower than some of the scores that I'd got on the actual LSAT.
Yeah.
Like below the 164, below 161. And I never let it get to me. To me, what that meant was, okay, I need to take a break. Like,
right,
clearly it was too much. Or I was in a coffee shop and it was like really distracting. And I still want to get myself to the place where I could be at a coffee shop and do the LSAT really well. But I'm not going to let that affect my confidence.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times people attach themselves to things that are not, it doesn't define them, but they feel like it does.
Yeah.
But for me, it's just like, all of those are just like, you take that as a learning point and you're like, okay, how do I use that information to get better? It wasn't like, oh, I got a 156. I'm a person who gets a 156. It's, I got a 156. And I think what that means is I need to work on this section.
Yeah.
I need to work on that section. I need to do this.
So having a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Instead of being fixed to thinking that it defines you, just knowing that you can grow from it.
Yeah, I think all of us have that potential of like always getting better no matter where we are.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one thing that I would mention.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing your story, Doreen. I think a lot of people may find the story inspirational because I mean, most people would be able to, I can definitely relate to some of the things you're talking about. So before we leave, I just wanted to say thanks for tuning into Before You Take the LSAT. If you found this video helpful, you should check out her podcast. Her Instagram is really helpful. It's motivational. And subscribe to this channel. And I think that's it.
And just as a final thing, we've already mentioned, but thank you, Shannon, so much for your part in this journey. I don't know if I would have ever made that first video if you hadn't been there supporting me. So thank you, Shannon.
Thank you. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, guys.
All right.